Apart from his scholarly writings in English, he has written 30 books in Tamil. Tirunelveli Educatium va 1908 is a lively and gripping narrative of a series of events which took place at the height of the Swadeshi movement. This book makes a very important contribution to the genre of non-fiction in Tamil Nadu, and it has received the Sahit Academy Award this year. I hand the mic over to Sri D.I. Arvindan.
Yeah, okay. Good evening to everyone. So, வணக்கம். When I met you first in during early 90s, uh, I had an impression that you were a literary person. You were talking about Bharadiyar, Pudumai Pittan, Jayaganthan, Sundar Ramasamy, Asokamitran, and various writers, worldwide writers and all that. So I thought you were a literary person. You write about literature and all that. Like that, you came out with a Yeah, you came out. So when I met you first, I thought you are a literary person because of the names and books you referred to belong to many very important writers and books. And you came out with a book on Pudumai Pittan, his Pudumai Pittan's works and all that. But after a few years, you were known as a historian. So how this transformation happened?
Vanakkam, good afternoon. No transformation happened at all. I have always been uh, both a literary person and a student of history. In fact, I believe that there is no contradiction between literature and history. Firstly, history is a form of writing which is dependent so heavily on language. Firstly, historians, we use documents which are all written documents. And when we write, we actually address an audience who have to read that narrative. And if you look at it, all the great historians, whether the classical historians or the modern historians, the best historians always write well. There are very few good historians who write poorly. So whether you look at, whether it is E.P. Thompson or Eric Hobsbawm or in our own country, if you think of Ashin Das Gupta or Shumit Sarkar, they all write very well. And also now I can see Shukanto Chaudhary is here, is an eminent teacher of English, but I'm sure he reads a lot of history. He will remember that in our curriculum, in our school and college curriculum, students of English regularly read Gibbon's extracts from Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And I know that English social history by Trevelyan was part of the syllabus of most Indian universities for MA. So this, I think, there is no contradiction between the two. It is people who are neither historically oriented nor having any literary taste. They are the ones who think that both are antithetical. They are not. That is one part. The second part is, the Tamil situation. We really don't have a audience for history writing, right? Our history teachers don't read, and thankfully they also don't teach. So, which means that they cannot spoil young students. So, a historian in Tamil Nadu has to find his or her own audience, and I think people like me and my the people whom I followed, we all write for a literary audience. My readers are actually readers of Tamil literature. They might be reading fiction or poetry or criticism. I am actually trying to reach only them because I have no other audience. So I think this is the context in which I began to write. So in fact, we met in the very early 90s, but even in the 80s, I had written 3 or 4 books, which were all works of history. I always focused on, I see myself as a historian, but who came to history through literature. So my first readings were all in the both classical Tamil literature and some of the great writers that you mentioned, whether it is Sundar Ramaswamy, T. Janak Raman, Asokamitran, K. Rajanarayanan, Jayagam. We read all of them. I think the sooner we try to break this non-existent wall between literature and history, the better for both Tamil literature and Tamil history.
Yeah, I knew you had written some books on history before we met, but the impression I got was you were a literary person. And there is one more question related to literature history. Literature, the two creative literature is predominantly based on imagination. History is not based on imagination. What is the connection? What is the role of imagination in history? And what is the role of history in literature?
Okay. Before I respond to that question, let me say why I was talking mostly about literature to you. I find that in even to this day, there's very few people with whom I am able to have a conversation about history in Tamil Nadu or Chennai. Very few of my peers in the discipline. There are very few in Tamil Nadu. So there is very few with whom I can actually talk about the craft of history, the practice of history, etc. And most of our friends are literary friends. So we talk more about literature. Coming to your question about literature as being about imagination and history about being grounded in facts. Once again, it goes back to this kind of very commonplace understanding of history and literature being antithetical to each other. People say, yes, history is all about facts. In fact, the joke used to be that, Sardar K.M. Panikar, he wrote a book called A Survey of Indian History. The reason why he wrote this was when he was in New York, an American historian told him, what is your Indian history? It looks like a telephone directory. It has only names and numbers. So, in response to that criticism, K.M. Panikar wrote that. So, that is a very, the kind of history that was taught, say, 2 3 generations ago, was all about, political history, narrative about kings and queens and wars and dates. So, that was one generation. So, because of that, you get the sense that history, there is no place for imagination. But if you look at it, I think imagination is central to any writing. Uh, there is a famous book by C. Wright Mills, a great sociologist. He called his book The Sociological Imagination, where he emphasizes imagination. Without imagination, none of the human sciences can exist, whether it is sociology, history, political science, or anthropology. Will be imagination. Imagination doesn't mean, you don't think of hobbits and Harry Potter and magic wands and magic spells. What we mean by imagination is there is always a gap. What you get is a set of documents, right? And no document will be, there will be gaps. Uh, the future looks very different. These days, uh, I am told that many of the American research libraries are buying over the hard disk of major scholars so that they get all the records. Every email sent, every email received. I don't know whether the spam box is also sold. I don't know about that. The entire uh, memory of the computer is sold. But if you find until now, only what survives or what the author or the creators of the records decide should survive, only they remained. And there was the ravages of time. Termites might eat it. There might be a fire. There might be a flood. You find that repeatedly in Tamil Nadu. Every time there is a major flood, there's one or the other repository of records which get lost. So we have to write with what survives, and what survives will necessarily be incomplete. For instance, let us say, I am editing the correspondence of Uve Swaminathan, the great Tamil scholar. He preserved all the letters that he got, more than 3,000 letters. But of the hundreds and hundreds of correspondents who were in correspondence with him, who were in stature and scholarship much lower than him, they did not think it fit to preserve the letters that he wrote. But this great scholar preserved the letters of everybody. So now you have only one side. If you will remember, I wrote that long article about the editorial rivalry between C.Y. Damodaram Pillai,
And Ube
Uve
Samna.
Samnadayar. What do we have? We had 43 letters from Damodaram Pillai. We don't have a single letter from
Ube
Uve Samnadayar. So how do you fill that gap? That is where imagination comes in. But once again, imagination doesn't mean letting your imagination run wild. You have to be grounded. You should know that particular period which you are studying, and then you try to fill the gaps, and then ultimately you have to write a story. You make choices. You don't uh, uh, you don't quote everything. Of thousands of pages that have survived, you choose only certain parts. Why do you choose certain parts? Why do you leave out certain paragraphs? Why do you choose certain letters? Why do you choose the evidence given by one person and overlook the evidence given by another person? So everything, the choice that you make is dependent on your kind of imagination. And where literature comes into is that literature, once again, we many people have this misconception that literature is all about imagination. You have flying horses and singing elephants, but that is not literature. You know that the greatest literature have a connect with reality. This is the first lesson of literature. So even though we call it creative arts, imaginative writing, it is like they say, literature is actually more than real. The reality that literature captures is even more real than reality.
Some super reality.
Super reality, it's a reality that helps you to understand the human predicament. So the same way, historians are also doing that. And if I may add one more thing, the narrative that we use is heavily influenced by literature. It is said that without Sherlock Holmes, without Arthur Conan Doyle, a kind of modern history that we write cannot exist, because we use almost the same kind of methods. The deductive logic that we use is heavily borrowed from, for instance, Sherlock Holmes and others. So you will notice that some of the best historians also are great readers of literature. So once I had the opportunity of visiting D.D. Kosambi's home, the great historian D.D. Kosambi. Kosambi had gifted all his, or his family had sold all the books to Jawaharlal Nehru University. Used to be there on the eighth floor. I don't know whether it exists anymore. But some of the books were left behind. The books that were left behind are all detective novels. Perry Mason, Arthur Conan Doyle. This kind of books he read. So everybody, good historians, read the so-called high literature, middle brow literature, so-called low level literature. All kinds of literature. Only if you read, you can write. And also, sometimes you have to go into the mind of the protagonist. So you are writing about somebody. Let us say you are writing a study of Mary Shelley. What you have got are her books, some correspondence, and the memoirs written by the family. How do you get into her mind? How do you imagine? How do you know what is going in her mind? You don't do a polygraph test. They don't exist. So that is where imagination comes into play. You have to think like them. And when you think like them, it should be grounded in those times. If it is not grounded in those times, the biggest sin of a historian, anachronism, will come. Something that doesn't fit into that time will come into it.
Okay. But can we say um, creative writers have the freedom of imagination, which the historians don't have?
Uh, I think both historians and literary creative writers both have the same freedom to imagine. But everybody is, tied to the ground. Without being grounded, you cannot imagine. It depends how much of that freedom that you use. If you don't use that freedom to imagine well, then you will fail. You don't know what goes on in the mind of somebody. You are writing, suppose you are writing about the times of Genghis Khan or Timur-Lane. We have to imagine what was going through in their mind. How did they strategize? What did they strategize? And what were the times? In those times, in these constraints, what did they think? I think that is the challenge.
You said most of, you said most of your readers were literary readers, including myself. So, what we thought about your writing is uh, we first find it's a it's almost like a creative writing, a literary a literary piece. It may not be a story, but it's a literary piece. That's what we found. But what about the conventional history students or readers who read history? How do they perceive you? How do they react to you? Other than the literary readers, the common history readers or students, how do they react to that?
To the best of my knowledge, nobody in the history departments in Tamil Nadu read me. The few readers that I might have among history students or history teachers, they are very few. Okay, and they have other interests. That's why they are reading me. My primary audience is the general reader and the literary readers. So I am not worried about people who don't read me. Who don't read me, I don't worry about them because They are not reading me, so I don't worry about them. But I have the general average reader who has a literary sensibility. That is the reader that I am trying to reach. So the other, all the models that I have, the historians whom I respect, all of them are good writers. It can be Brothel, it can be Emmanuel Leroy Laduri, it can be E.P. Thompson, it can be Eugenie Genovese, it can be anybody. They all write so well. So my idea is, if I can write half as well as them, that is good enough. So I keep that in mind. And the other aspect is that any topic that I write about, firstly, I am genuinely interested in that topic. I am excited by the discoveries that I have made. Find it when I interpret the documents that I have found, the excitement that I get, I want to communicate it to the writer, to the reader. That is my view. So when I try to communicate that excitement, when I genuinely try to do it using all the literary devices that are available, I think it might work out. I'll give you one example. This award winning book, it's actually like the first and the last chapter of the book. The first chapter is
It's a
called
summary of what
Kalagam
happened.
Pirandal. Kalagam Pirandadu. The last chapter is called Nyayam Pirandada. So this is this is a Tamil proverb. I have split the proverb into two. First phrase comes as the beginning of the first chapter. The second phrase becomes the end. And it is also like what in Nannul, the பொருள்கோள் விற்பூட்டு பொருள்கோள் அப்படின்னு ஒன்று இருக்கு, மாணவர்களுக்கு தெரியும் இல்லையா? விற்பூட்டு பொருள்கோள்னு ஒன்று இருக்கு. ஸோ it starts here and ends there. It is tied at the two ends. The same structure that I try to do. So I try to use only literary devices, rhetorical devices from literature to write. So it is not only that in my writing, as you know it very well, I use phrases from old Tamil poetry. I use proverbs. I twist some proverbs. So basically, it is the uh, interest in literature and the training in literature that is the bedrock of my writing.
Yeah, um, I can understand that while um, history writing has literary elements, even literary writing has historical elements. For example, War and Peace is a historical reflection on history. So that is the connection is always there. My question, another question is, when most of your readers are literary readers, um, then what would be the impact of your writing among the general public or the history students or in the area of exclusive area of history? So you have the core audience from literary field, but they are not working or they are not interacting in the history field. What could be the impact in the history field? And that's what I want to know.
Uh, I would say that my my Tamil writings once again are read mostly by general readers and literary readers. But I also write in English, right? The English writing, my academic writing, I would tend to believe that it is taken seriously by my peers. So my academic writings are in the reading list of many uh, colleges and universities, not only in India but abroad. except Tamil Nadu. No college or university in Tamil Nadu history department prescribes me reading. You cannot blame them because they are ignorant of it, so they don't know. But otherwise, I think I have one of the historians who's taken seriously whenever the colonial period of South India or Tamil Nadu is taken into account. So I think that if you look at citations and things like that, I would say that my work is taken seriously by my peers also. And I also strongly believe that you have to establish yourself in your discipline. In your discipline, invariably in the Tamil context, what we do is, people, historian pretends to be a historian among literary persons, and a literary person pretends to be a historian among his son. So you try to fool people. That is not something uh, I'm for. You have to first establish yourself in your field. Show your peers that you have made the cut, that you are trained and you are competent in your discipline. Only after that you can cross that disciplinary boundaries and try to address.
In Tamil, the history books, whether it is textbook or other books on history, they are flat descriptions of what happened with facts and figures and all that. But your history book, in your history book, you construct a narrative around whatever you want to write, whether it is Bharatiyar or VOC or Tamil history or the history of coffee, social this thing. You are creating a narrative. In that way, I find it as a literary piece. How do you capture that the essence of the narrative around a particular thing? Is that can you explain the process?
Uh, so the way I write is the good historian should keep reading. So read widely. That is very important. You should be reading not only in your specialization, you should be reading all and sundry. But in your own area, you have to read intensively. So you are working on colonial political movements, let us say. The period that you take up, you should try to read everything that is possible. Contemporary newspapers, memoirs, autobiographies, novels, fiction, letters, pamphlets, everything and anything, government records, court proceedings. You should read extensively and intensively, soak into it. And when you do that, uh, unlike a sociologist, anthropologist who goes with the question to the field, a historian usually is the other way around. The historian usually has an interest in a broad area, and only after jumping into the sources, the historian's research questions emerge. So, I'll give you an example. One of the better known writings of mine is the history of coffee drinking. So, how did I go about doing it? I never set out to write a study of coffee drinking in colonial Tamil Nadu. When I was doing my research on colonial publishing, Vauci, and others, I suddenly found that in the 1920s, suddenly references to coffee drinking are coming. Coffee drinking. References to coffee drinking are coming up in the stories, essays, jokes, etc. After a while, I realized that something is happening. So probably coffee is a new product. So at a certain point, you start thinking that probably this is something that you should study. So you start making notes on slips of paper or on cards, and then you put it away. After some years, You look at your files, you suddenly realize that, there is this bunch of cards just on coffee drinking. You look through it, then you realize that you can do something with it. So then you start systematically reading. You start thinking where you can find more material about this. Then it becomes a focused search. In the first stage, when you collected these notes, they were purely circumstantial and fortuitous. You didn't go looking for it. But after a point, you start doing purposeful research. You try to see where you might be able to find more material on coffee drinking. Then I systematically collected the material. Then I tried to see if there are writings about academic writings about coffee drinking. Then at a certain point, you try to keep postponing it, but then suddenly somebody invites you to a conference or something. You have to write something. Then you, okay, this particular theme might fit that conference. Then you start looking up that notes, arranging them, and then you start writing. So there are many ways of writing. This is not an example that I would. I'm not a good example for students. Okay, students I think should work systematically. It is better to work systematically. I am not a. I'm a kind of a erratic researcher. But generally, what people do is they have to write a skeleton structure.
Put a map.
Yeah, kind of. They call it technically skeleton structure. You kind of map where do you start, what is the subheadings or this argument and all these things. You have a framework, revise it and start writing. But since I started as a literary writer, I can't do that. I Once I arrange my cards in a certain sequence, then I start writing. Once I start writing, at a certain point, that is a magical moment when you are not in control of the data. The data takes control of you. It leads you into its own paths. And it is a very exhilarating and exhausting
Yeah, that's
exercise.
what creative experience is.
Exactly. Precisely, whatever creative writers say about
Their
their
process.
process of writing, the same thing happens to me. I am like a man possessed. திருநெல்வேலி தம்பிங்க யாராவது இருக்காங்களா இங்க? கோட்டி பிடிச்ச மாதிரி ஆயிரும். அதாவது குற்றால குறவஞ்சியில ஒரு அருமையான பாட்டு வரும். துடிக்குதன் உதடும் நாவும் சொல்லு சொல்லு எனவே நாவில் இடிக்குது குரளி அம்மே அப்படின்னு சொல்லி அந்த குறமகள் சொல்லுவா. அது போல ஒரு கட்டத்துல வாட் ஹேப்பன்ஸ் அட் ஒன் பாயிண்ட் யூ ஆர் நாட் சேயிங் எனிதிங் சம்திங்
You are under the spell.
யூ ஆர் அண்டர் அ கைண்ட் ஆஃப் ஸ்பெல் யூ ஆர் பொசஸ்ட் அண்ட் தென் யூ ரைட்
It will take whatever it wants
it,
from
it,
you
it takes its
and
own
it
shape.
takes its own shape.
It takes its own shape. I know lines, old lines from poetry or literature or something, they will fall in place
Cross references.
without you knowing it. You are exhausted. After that, you take up the text after a gap. You should not immediately start revising. After having a draft, you should put it away and then come back to it. That's when you start
That's
working.
also what creative writers used to do.
Same thing. Then you work on the draft. And once you keep reworking the drafts, making small changes, emendations, you move some paragraphs here and there, you cut off some paragraphs. Uh, as you know, I have been a writer for 40 years. From the times of writing with my hand, then to typing, then now to word processing on a computer, so many changes have come which have helped the refining
Writing.
process. But finally, when at one point I decide that I'm going to finish, give up. Like, Paul Valery is supposed to have said, poems are never finished, they are only abandoned. Same thing, after a certain point, I abandon what I have written. I send it off. I don't want to look at it. And after a long time, sometimes
When you go through your
when
own,
I have to read it again, usually I find a sense of complete inadequacy. I think, this is should have been done better. This line is not right. I should have said something else. But suddenly, what will happen, in one particular place, you'll find two or three fantastic paragraphs. Can't believe it. Did I write it? It doesn't look like it. It's so good. How did it happen? I think the best try, at least to me, is I should give this quote or some other force to occasionally write some good paragraphs. I leave it at that. That is how I go about doing the writing. And to just give you one more instance, the way the story takes on itself. Some of you might be familiar with my book, Bharati Kavinganum Kapurimayam. I also wrote it in English. Who wants that song? You know what? When I started writing that book, Subramanya Bharati's half brother, Viswanatha Iyer, was a villain. This mic. Okay. When I began the writing the story, this man was a villain. After I finished writing and I read it, he was not a villain. He had become a tragic. It was actually, you know, beyond his self. Forces beyond his control had forced him to do things which he didn't want to do. How did that come about? It's almost like, many novelists say that, I didn't know why this character ended up doing what it did. The same thing has happened. And I think my better writings are that kind of writings where I have not controlled the narrative, where I've let the story speak through me.
actually, when you explain the process of your writing, me as a creative writer can relate with it. Same thing happens when I write a novel or short story and all that. I don't want to explain that here. One more classic example can be given. When Tolstoy wanted to write about Anna, he didn't have any positive opinion about Anna. He wanted to criticize Anna's act. But when he finished the story, uh, result has turned out to be something else. Anna's character came up and it has established itself as one of the most memorable characters in literary history. So that is the creative process. It goes beyond the presumptions and plans of the writer. So that happens in history writing in your history writing. That is very exciting to hear, and that's why we keep reading you. Okay, I have one more question related to this narrative thing. Actually, related to that Vishwanath Iyer. Like Vishwanath Iyer, I find many characters in your historical writing. See, when we read a history book, we read had Shah Jahan won, where Aurangzeb did what Shivaji did, what Rajendra Chola built, something like that. And there are information, there are incidents, there are some developments, but we don't find a character. In historical fictions, and they give some characters, but in historical writing, factual historical writing, the characters are not emerging. But in your writing, the characters, as I said, that Vishwanath Iyer, that character, it's something, it's a memorable character for me. Like any other literary character, Vishwanath Iyer is a very important character for me after reading that. So, like that you wrote a book on VOC and Gandhi. I know Gandhi. I know Gandhi from various sources, but the Gandhi portrayed from your narrative is something different. I got a different idea of what the man is, like that. Another dimension of Gandhi. This kind of characterization, emerging some, creating some characters. How do you derive at it?
I think those characters are right there. I only found them. I don't take any credit for it, but I have an interest in like like the demon in the fairy tales. Wherever the human flesh or the human odor that a demon can smell. Similarly, I think a historian should be open to or ready to catch on to any interesting personality. So I love personalities. uh, I love heroes. If there are any heroes, especially tragic heroes, I immediately latch on to them, and I've only discovered them. I've not created those characters. That is how I would respond.
You said no Tamil schools or universities have your books as their textbooks. I think one of the major reasons for that is there are there are no competent persons to understand the book and teach it in a way that has to be taught to the students. Even the even the literary teachers, they are not teaching the literature as literature. They are teaching it only as a gist. They say the gist of the story and give some question and answers and all that. So there should be some competence to understand and teach such kind of books. So I don't think the time has come up. Let us believe that it would come soon. Anyway, coming back to your writing, who are your inspirations internationally and in Indian arena? Who are all your inspiration for such a for history writing and writing history in such a manner?
See, I grew up reading the British Marxist historians. So, E.P. Thompson, Eric Hobsbawm, uh, the American historian Eugene Genovese, the French historians Ferdinand Braudel, Emmanuel Leroy Ladurie, whole range of historians. I don't think, I mean, I'm not trying to emulate any of them, but by reading them all, I hope some little bit of it has rubbed on to me. But also, I would say, literary writing, a fair amount of reading in fiction and lots of non-fiction. I read lots of. I like the long form essay very much. Long form essays are my favorite, and also big non-fiction books. So I read. The reason I say that I don't emulate any of them is that I the best kinds of books that I read, ones that I cannot write. See, I am not a synthesizer. So, like Eric Hobsbawm, he can he wrote this 4-volume book covering the entire modern period from the French Revolution to the breakup of the Soviet Union, synthesizing a vast amount of material. I can't. I am not a synthesizer. I work on in small time frames, look at it closely, and I study two things. I think we have focused a lot on personalities. The other aspect of history that I very interested in, I'm not interested in structure, but I'm interested in process. So most of my work you will find is that over a particular historical moment, I uh, write, I narrate the process of change from one thing to another. So the what I have read, what I read a lot are works of synthesis. But what I actually write are focused more on short time frames where individuals play a big role. This I would say. But I would say, Christopher Hill is for me was a very important historian. Um, uh, in terms of fiction, a whole range of Tamil writers, the names that we mentioned, T. Janakiraman, Sugamitran, Sundar Ramasamy. I'm kind of eclectic in my reading. I try to read various things. Pudume Pittan, of course, is a very big influence. One aspect, one other big influence is the Tamil scholarly tradition. The pundits who are dismissed by modern writers, I love them. So I read a lot, and I think one of the things that interests some readers is that how I am able to bring in uh, uh, so-called archaic language into a very modern language.
So, um, you are mostly writing about social and cultural history, and the two from modern era. Why don't you go back pre-modern era and write about something like famine and all that? Why are you not writing about those things that I want to know?
Pre-modern. See, it requires training. To write on pre-modern history requires a separate kind of training. I am familiar with pre-modern literary texts, but I do not have training in reading the source material of the pre-modern period. So I am not a WhatsApp historian. Okay, I'm not a WhatsApp historian. I cannot write about anything and everything. Today I can write about Harappan history. Tomorrow I will write about Mesopotamian history. That is not possible. Training is required. I think I have been trained only in the modern period. So I will only focus on that. I'll try to improve my skills in that area. But as you know, I've written about modern poetry, but not history. I will not do it.
Can you briefly tell any interesting responses you have got from your readers?
Uh, okay, I've been writing for 40 years. In the first 25 years or so, I've barely got any response from readers. I kept writing because I believed in what I was doing. But I think over the last, say, about 10, 15 years, I have been getting lots of
Good.
response. Young readers are reading me. People, in fact, somebody even said that, no, I might be the only Tamil historian who has a fan club. Exaggerated, but you get the point. But finally, what I would say is that, one instance I'll give, and that's where perhaps we can stop and take one or two questions. The last book that I published, Swadeshi Stream, an 80-year-old man called me. We had had some bad blood between us. That was the history. But he called me. He said, I read the book. I just finished the last chapter. And as he said that, there was a lump in his throat. And then he started sobbing. So I don't claim credit for it. But the credit that I can claim is I chose the right story. And I chose a tragic hero to write about. And I did not come in the way of that storytelling
And
itself.
you chose to write in the right way.
Yes. So, and it was a very moving moment. And, somebody actually is moved by what you write. Then you feel that, you have done your
Yes.
job. There is a saying in English called an honest job well done. I don't know about it. It's an honest job done honestly. That is something that I can assure my readers.
One last question. What are your future plans? Can you give a brief about it?
This is a mandatory question that comes at the end of every conversation. But I have nothing new to report because for the last 40 years, I've been writing the same thing. I have not ventured into anything new. What I started writing in the early 80s, work on Chidambaram Pillai, Bharati, Periyar. This is the work I am continuing to do. I hope to write two more volumes on Vivo Chidambaram Pillai, and I hope to finish a big biography of Periyar. This is the idea. Let us see.
Yeah, we hope and we think those books will come out very soon. Any questions from the audience?
As you formulate your question, I just want to add that something that I said yesterday. Never ever imagined that I would receive this Sahitya Academy Award. I've been to this building dozens of times. I've participated in conferences, used the library, but I never ever imagined that I would get a
I would
award. So I'm
now
delighted.
I should add something here. When he received the award, there were overwhelming response, overwhelming reception for that award from Tamil readers and writers overall. But a few persons said, "Oh yes, award on Sahitya can be given for a non-fiction," and a section of readers gave fitting reply for that. Creative writing is not only imaginative writing. Writing on facts and happenings, written in a very creative and imaginative way, is a literary work. It's a creative work. So he deserves this 100%. That was the response reply given by some writers. So my heartiest congratulations for my long-time friend Chalapati for getting this award, which he deserves 100%. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this wonderful conversation and a new look at history. And you do need imagination to know that one day you might win an award for all the honest work you've been doing honestly. So, congratulations once again, and thank you for this wonderful conversation. Our next session is Poetry, the Mirror of the Soul, but we need a few minutes to change the setup on the day, so please bear with us.